I had barely opened my eyes before the cold sting of my mother's voice cut through the screen. She didn't raise her tone, didn't blink, didn't bother pretending she cared how her words landed. She just looked at me through the tiny square of our family Zoom call and said, "We don't want you showing up at her graduation. Don't make this uncomfortable." No pause. No explanation. Just a verdict. Riley leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, the kind she wore whenever I was being pushed out of the frame. My father shifted his gaze to the side, pretending something on the wall demanded his attention. It was the kind of silence I grew up inside, a silence that told me I was on my own. And in that moment, something old and familiar inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just broke cleanly, like a thread that had been pulled too tightly for too long. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what I had supposedly done. I simply took a breath and realized they had finally given me permission to do something I should have done years ago, step back. Before I ever understood what it meant to stand up for myself, keeping the peace meant shutting my mouth and absorbing whatever storm my family threw my way. I thought love was supposed to be earned through sacrifice, through silence, through proving my worth in ways nobody asked for but everyone expected. I had grown up in a home where giving wasn't kindness, it was currency. And I was the one they always collected from. My mother, Lorraine, ruled that house like gravity itself. Every decision, every emotional shift, every argument orbited around her wants. My father, Victor, stayed in her shadow, always agreeing, never interfering. And Riley, my younger sister, was the bright, adored child who could do no wrong. She bloomed under all that attention while I learned to shrink quietly behind it. When I moved to Seattle in my 20s, I thought putting physical distance between us would give me breathing room. I believed independence would grow naturally, like a plant reaching for sunlight. But I carried old habits with me, and distance didn't change the roles we'd been raised into. It started the day I got my first real job. Lorraine called to congratulate me and in the next breath, mentioned that Riley's tuition had gone up unexpectedly. "Just this once," she said, exhausted but expectant. I didn't hesitate, I paid it. And that once became a semester, then another. Before long, I was covering her textbooks, her rent gap, her meal plan upgrades. Riley never had to worry, not with me around. And Lorraine stopped pretending I had a choice in the matter. Victor, as usual, watched quietly without stepping in. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that helping made me a good sister. But every time I questioned a charge, every time I slowed down a payment, Lorraine's voice would sharpen, just enough to remind me that hesitation was disloyalty. There was one Christmas I'll never forget. I had worked extra shifts and saved for months to buy Riley a laptop, thinking it would ease her stress. When she unwrapped it, she glanced at the model and said, "Oh, I thought it would be the newer version." Lorraine touched her arm gently, smiling. "Maybe next year, Amber will figure it out." I swallowed the sting and said nothing. Because that's what I always did. I made myself small, useful, quiet. But the first real crack came months later, quietly, in the shape of a text I wasn't supposed to see. Lorraine had left her phone on the counter during a visit, and I glanced over just as a message from my aunt appeared. "She pays because she's gullible," my aunt wrote. Lorraine replied with a laughing emoji and the sentence, "Some kids were born to support the family." It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was clarity. A painful, bitter clarity. But even then, I didn't confront her. I tucked that knowledge deep inside, the way I did with everything else, and convinced myself it wasn't worth fighting over. I continued paying as if obligation could buy belonging. But the weeks leading up to that Zoom call felt wrong. Riley was unusually quiet. Lorraine was shorter in her messages. Every question I asked about tuition was brushed aside. There was a whisper of something under the surface, like a storm waiting to break. The storm arrived through a call from my bank. A representative with a steady voice explained that a credit card under my name, one I had forgotten existed, was repeatedly used for high-value purchases. Designer shoes, jewelry, a weekend shopping spree over $4,000. The card was supposed to be for emergencies. I hadn't touched it in years. I didn't need to guess who had. When I confronted Lorraine, she exhaled dramatically and said, "You're being emotional. Riley needed things for graduation. Don't ruin this for her." As if I was the one who had crossed a line. But the true punch came when I checked the rest of my accounts. 2 more cards were nearly maxed out. Subscription charges to services I didn't use, payments I never approved. all linked back to one of two places: my parents' home address or Riley's accounts. That wasn't careless. That wasn't accidental. That was entitlement, disguised as family responsibility. And just when I thought I had reached my limit, Riley's group chat delivered the final push. A screenshot, accidentally forwarded to me, with her message at the top. "Don't stress about money. Amber always pays. She's basically our bank." I stared at that line until the letters blurred. Something in me, something that had been bent for years, finally snapped back into shape. So when the Zoom call opened the next evening and Lorraine said she didn't want my face at the graduation, I didn't crumble the way I once would have. I felt the bruise of the past years throb, but I also felt something steadier forming beneath it, something like resolve. And instead of begging or explaining, I said the one thing they never expected to hear from me. "Then you'll never see my money again." Lorraine blinked, Riley scoffed, Victor froze. But I stayed calm, because they weren't losing a daughter. They were losing their safety net. And for the first time in my life, I felt the smallest spark of freedom. Silence filled the Zoom window after my words, thick and disbelieving, as if none of them had ever imagined a world where I had boundaries. Lorraine recovered first. She leaned closer, her expression tightening into something sharp and cold. "Don't be dramatic," she said, as though I had merely refused to pass the salt. "Riley's graduation is important. Don't make this about you." I almost laughed. They had spent my entire life making everything about them. But now, when I was finally drawing a line, suddenly I was the problem. Riley rolled her eyes so hard it looked painful. "God, Amber, you're literally overreacting. It's just a few charges, and you know I'll pay you back eventually." She said it with the confidence of someone who had never paid anyone back in her life. Victor cleared his throat, the way he always did when he wanted to seem present without actually taking a side. "Let's calm down. We don't need to turn this into a big issue." But it was already a big issue, a years-long issue. One I had been pretending didn't exist while I emptied myself to keep them comfortable. "I'm not paying another bill," I said quietly, calmly. "And I'm reporting every card, every charge. If you've used my name, you'll deal with the consequences." Riley scoffed again. "You wouldn't dare!" Lorraine's eyebrows twitched. Just a tiny movement, but it told me everything. She believed me. And for the first time, she didn't know what to do with that. The call ended abruptly, Lorraine muttering something about needing space to think. But I didn't need space. I needed action. So I spent the next hours contacting every bank, every credit agency, every account that had ever touched my name. Some representatives told me the charges could be contested. Others told me investigations would begin immediately. A few asked whether I wanted to press charges. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. By the time I finally sat down on my couch, my apartment felt strangely unfamiliar, as if I'd stepped into someone else's life. For years, this place had been a pit stop between responsibilities. Now it felt like a beginning. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from my parents, missed calls from Riley, a barrage of guilt-laced paragraphs telling me I misunderstood, that I was overreacting, that I was tearing the family apart. But the message that anchored my resolve came from Riley herself, written in frustration. "You always make things harder. Why can't you just do what you're supposed to?" What I was supposed to do, not love, not support, obey. That was my role in their minds. I blocked every number. The next morning, the quiet felt different. Not peaceful exactly, but clean, honest. I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and realized I could breathe without bracing for impact. I didn't have to answer to any demands. I didn't have to apologize for existing. I wasn't free yet, but for the first time, freedom seemed possible. A few days later, Lorraine showed up at my apartment uninvited. I opened the door to find her standing with her arms folded, lips pressed thin, eyes assessing me from head to toe like she was deciding whether I was still the person she could control. "I'm not staying long," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "Then don't stay at all," I replied. She froze mid-step. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her mind, trying to reconcile this version of me with the daughter she thought she owned. "This is childish," she said finally. "Family supports each other." "That's all I've ever done?" "Well," she said with a clipped sigh, "Riley needs help." "No." She blinked. "You didn't even hear what I was going to—" "No." The word felt almost soft in my mouth, like something that had been waiting its entire life to be spoken. Lorraine stared at me for several seconds before her expression shifted into something more desperate. "You know," she said slowly, "if you go through with these bank disputes, it could hurt your sister. It could ruin her future. That's not my fault. But you can prevent it, Amber. Just drop the claims. We'll fix it as a family." "You mean I'll fix it?" The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She swallowed hard, the first sign of genuine discomfort I had ever seen on her face. She was losing control, and she couldn't stand it. "You are being heartless," she whispered, "after everything we've done for you." I tilted my head. "What exactly have you done for me?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because she knew, and I knew, and neither of us could pretend anymore. Lorraine left without another word. For a while after she was gone, the guilt hit me in waves. Sharp, unfamiliar, almost instinctive. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I kept waiting for the regret to follow. But instead, something else came. Relief. Deep, shaking, unexpected relief. With them out of my life, the days began to feel less suffocating. I threw myself into work, and without financial drains weighing me down, I finally had the mental space to breathe. I went to bed without stress gnawing at my stomach. I woke without dread. I even started reconnecting with people I had pushed away because my life had always been too consumed with my family's demands. I was still rebuilding, still piecing myself together after years of being stretched thin. But it felt possible now. It felt real. Then, 2 weeks later, Riley called me from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity or maybe closure won. "Amber," she said, her voice thin and trembling, "please, don't hang up." I waited. "I didn't know Mom was using your other cards," she said quietly. "I thought you were okay with the charges. I swear I didn't know about everything." She was lying. I could hear it in the pauses. But then her voice cracked. "They won't let me walk at graduation unless I pay the remaining fees. They're calling it delinquent behavior. Mom said you'd fix it. She promised you would." "And you believed her?" "I don't know what else to do," she whispered. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel the urge to rescue her, or them, or any situation that wasn't mine to fix. I felt clarity. "I'm not fixing this," I said softly, "and you need to learn to handle what you start." Riley choked back a sound, half sob, half disbelief. "You're really choosing money over your sister?" "No," I said, "I'm choosing myself." She let out a shaking breath before the line went silent. I didn't know if she hung up or if she simply couldn't speak anymore. But it didn't matter. The conversation was over. The role they gave me was gone, and I was done paying for a place in their lives. I put my phone down and realized something simple and profound. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing them. I had already found myself. Everything after that dinner table explosion felt like a storm that refused to pass. The silence in the house was thick and cold, stretching from the kitchen to the hallways. Every time I crossed paths with my mother, she pretended she didn't see me. She would shift her gaze, lift her chin, and walk away as if ignoring me erased the weight of her words. Dad wasn't any better. He avoided conversations, avoided eye contact, and acted as if I was some stranger who wandered into their home. I buried myself into work. My company was growing, and the IPO launch was getting closer. Investors were excited, the team was motivated, and the world felt like it was finally recognizing the effort I had poured into every single step. But at home, nothing changed. The doors remained closed, and their hearts remained locked. A week before the IPO, my sister's wedding preparations intensified. The house was filled with distant relatives, boxes of decorations, and nonstop arguments about color palettes and menus. No one talked about the things that truly mattered. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked if I needed help. It felt like every person was so focused on celebrating one daughter that they couldn't even acknowledge the existence of the other. One evening, as I returned from a long meeting, I overheard my parents discussing finances in the living room. Their voices were sharp, irritated, and impatient. Dad was pacing. "We still need at least another $20,000 to cover the venue upgrades." Mom sighed. "She will pay. She earns enough. She can handle it." Dad nodded confidently. "She should at least do this much for her sister." Every word felt like a punch. Not because they wanted help. That wasn't the problem. It was their assumption, their entitlement, Their absolute belief that I owed them everything simply because I existed. Mom continued, "Just wait. She'll come to us eventually. She knows we're under stress." Dad grumbled, "If she doesn't, then she's even more ungrateful than I thought." Ungrateful, the word burned. I stepped into the room, my keys still in my hand. "If you two need something," I said calmly, "you can ask me directly instead of assuming or complaining behind my back." They both froze. Dad crossed his arms. "We didn't think we needed to ask. A daughter should help." Mom added, "She should, especially given everything we've done for you." I almost laughed. Everything you've done for me? Like calling me a burden? Like saying you should have abandoned me? Like throwing me out at dinner? Mom stiffened. Dad's jaw tightened. "That was an emotional moment," he said defensively. "You provoked us." I took a breath. "I provoked no one. You attacked me for protecting a child who didn't deserve your cruelty. You treated me like an intruder in my own home. And now you expect me to pay for a wedding as if I owe you something." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "You always dramatize things. We're your parents. You're supposed to support us." "And you're supposed to support me," I said, my voice steady. "But you only see me as a wallet." Silence. For the first time, they didn't have a comeback. I placed my bag down and spoke slowly, clearly. "Since you both refuse to apologize or acknowledge what you did, I am not paying a single cent for the wedding." Mom's eyes widened. "What? You can't do that. Everything is planned. Deposits are paid. We are counting on you." Dad stepped closer, pointing a finger. "Don't be selfish." My heart pounded. Selfish? The only thing I have done for years is give, contribute, sacrifice, and adjust. And still, you treat me like a mistake you can't erase. Mom's voice cracked with anger. "This is your sister's happiness. You'll ruin everything." I shook my head. "I won't ruin anything. I'm simply not going to be used anymore." With that, I turned and walked toward my room. Their protests followed me down the hallway like echoes of old wounds. The next morning, the house was buzzing with panic. Mom had called relatives, Dad had called vendors, and everyone was in crisis mode. But I stayed out of it. I focused on my work and prepared for the IPO. On the day of the launch, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls from my parents, messages demanding I reconsider, even relatives scolding me for being heartless. I silenced everything. On the day of the launch, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls from my parents, messages demanding I reconsider, even relatives scolding me for being heartless. I silenced everything. When the market opened, the numbers skyrocketed. The IPO hit $6.2 billion. My CFO burst into my office, laughing, shouting, shaking my shoulders. We did it! The team celebrated. Cameras flashed, news articles published within minutes. My inbox filled with partnership offers. I had built something powerful, something meaningful, completely on my own. Later that evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment, a message from Mom finally came through. "Congratulations. When will you send the money for the wedding?" "No, we're proud of you." "No, we're sorry." "No, well done." Just money. It was in that moment everything became painfully clear. I typed my reply the same way I delivered myself from their control. Calm, final, and free. "I am not paying. I owe you nothing. Please understand that from today onward, I will not be treated like a burden or an ATM. I wish my sister a happy future, but I will not sacrifice myself for people who refuse to see my worth." Then I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of their expectations, their insults, their manipulation, it all slipped off my shoulders like heavy chains finally released. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know if they would ever understand or change. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This time, the story didn't end with me breaking. It ended with me walking away, standing tall, clear in my worth, and determined to build a life where love wasn't conditional, respect wasn't negotiable, and my existence wasn't something to apologize for.